Shabbat Shalom. On this Shabbat, we return to the very beginning of the Torah, to Parashat Bereishit. It's great to have you along for the ride, and we sincerely hope that we will only need to discuss just a few, ideally a minority, of this year's Torah portions online and physically removed from one another, and we hope that it should be safe for us to come together again sooner than we might expect. Ideally for us to be together in person, and perhaps for us to even find a way to join each other online in ways that we've not yet done thus far. So in any case, here we are at the beginning, a place we've been before, and yet each time we return, we find new insights and something new to inspire us. Our sages have long been fascinated by numerous aspects of this story about the beginning of all beginnings. One point which stands out more than most others is how when God has created all but one, God has created an entire universe without any help, and there is one last piece of work before the Creator, and that is to create human beings. And it is at this point, for a reason that is really not immediately clear to us, that God announces, "Let us create human being in our image, according to our likeness." Most puzzling of all is why the language suddenly switches to the plural. Rashi tells us that God was addressing the ministering angels in heaven, as God didn't want them, these angels, who somewhere along the line had already been created, even though the text doesn't mention them. God doesn't want these angels to feel jealous by human beings, to feel insecure about the competition that they would provide, that human beings might become closer to God, or should we say that God might become closer to the human beings than God was to the angels. So Rashi says God pretends to consult with them, asking for their help and for their advice, but not really meaning it, just in the hope of making them feel better. The Ramban, however, taught in the name of Rabbi David Kimchi that the Holy Blessed One was speaking to the earth. Let us make human being, you and me. Since the earth gave the bounty of its physical material as it gave to other animals, and the Holy Blessed One gave the spiritual part. And so the Rambam teaches, in our image, according to our likeness, means that human beings should be similar to both to the earth and to God, in body to earth and in soul to God. I would like to suggest something altogether different, if I may. I'd like to propose that maybe this whole creation epic not only describes what happened like a historical account, but that it is designed to empower us. That God knows we are Torah's audience, and so it speaks to us, inviting us to become God's partners in the ever ongoing and continuing creation of life on the universe. It's an invitation to us to work with God in the ongoing creation of humanity, that indeed it takes three to create human life, body, and soul. The sense that we are God's partners is a long-standing, authentic trope in our Jewish faith. The rabbis of old taught it thousands of years ago, And in more recent times, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel reminded us, explaining that not only are we human beings not alone in our search for God, but that God too is in search of us. And so we need to feel empowered, terrifically empowered by the story of creation, which not only invites us to participate in the ongoing creation of humanity, but which also empowers us with having dominion over the rest of creation. It therefore tells us to come along, to participate with God in changing the world for the better. Something else, another concept that we already are so familiar with in Jewish life, the sense of healing the world, a world which is not yet complete in its creation. And so we need to appreciate the depth and breadth of our own power to create, to alter, to repair, and to influence. Creation and creating is truly awesome. Sometimes, as human beings know, it's pleasurable to be God's partner in planting and growing and creating. And other times it's really hard work, and we need to be honest about that. Rabbi Tarfon, after all, teaches us in Pirkei Avot that while we are not required to complete the work of the world, neither may we desist from doing so. And so I would like to conclude this thought by saying to you that today, in this very age and time in which we are living, we in our community and indeed throughout our country have the opportunity to do the work of changing and healing our world by voting too. This in particular is where our power is right now. And so I invite you to spend some time with me as I share a discussion with you that I had with Barbara Grosh just yesterday about the necessary and indeed the holy work that we need to do in our country, this time at the ballot box. Shabbat Shalom to all of you.
Well, hi, Barbara. It's great to see you here on my screen, even though, of course, you're just a few miles down the road.
Yeah, good to see you too.
Such is the situation. In any case, we're here to speak today about voting. And it's not, this discussion is not about Republican or Democrat, it's about voting. It's about us as Americans going to the polls on election day. And in particular, you have experience or some background with this that the rest of us don't, and that is that you're involved with the League of Women Voters. And I would love it if you could, certainly for my own benefit, but also for the benefit of those who are not familiar with the organization itself, if you could give us some ideas of what the organization's about, what its mission is.
Sure. So the League of Women Voters is a direct descendant of the women's suffrage movement. So, Susan B. Anthony died, I think, in 1907. And the person that had come up as sort of her acolyte was Carrie Chapman Catt. So she took the organization that Susan B. Anthony had built and worked it forward until the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. Now, voting rights actually are passed by states. So some states, women had the right to vote before 1920. So in each state, whenever women got the right to vote, they would change from what they were called, which I think was the National Women's Suffrage Association or something like that. They flipped it and called it the League of Women Voters. So the National League was born in 1920 when the National Amendment passed. So we're a voting rights organization. We're activists who try to establish voting rights. And so we fight for voting rights. We're parties to all kinds of lawsuits about voter suppression. But we also, Carrie Chapman Catt knew in 1920 that it's one thing to have the right to vote, and it's another thing to be a powerful, well-educated voter who gets yourself listened to. So, in addition to getting rights to vote, they try to help people be informed voters. They also do some lobbying kinds of stuff, some of it on sort of clean politics laws, but they actually have an enormous list of positions on every social action that you might ever want to see. I mean, literally the book is this thick.
Yeah.
And when they started, they did endorse candidates and parties, but that was because the fight for the amendment was so fresh, and they quickly decided that that was not the best role for them after women got the right to vote. So we're nonpartisan. We don't endorse parties or people. So we're just about getting people to exercise their right to vote. So in the Rochester League, since I joined, which was, I think, 2009, we look at the voting data and we see that it's very unequal. So I could show you a map of the county. We actually took the whole voter registration database and did geocoding to find out which census tract each voter was in. And then we found out how many people were in that census tract. So we could see how many of the adults in each census tract were registered to vote. And in your census tract, it's 100% of adults are registered to vote. In my census tract, I think it's 96%. But you can find a lot of census tracts in the city of Rochester where the numbers are down in the 40s, 47%, 44%. And that's just registration. The turnout figures are also different. So in a presidential year in your district and my district, probably 80% of registered voters will turn out and vote. And in those city districts, presidential years are still the biggest voting years, but it's turnout of 60 to 70% in a presidential year in the city. So it's very unequal how much power people exercise. So like literally if you stood in a neighborhood in the city and said, okay, scratch out that person, get it down to half, and now only half of them vote. It's like living in a ghost town as far as the political power. It drives me crazy about the local elections. So if you look at the registration data, it's also very unequal. So in the city of Rochester, like 80% of those who are registered in a party are Democrats and 20% are something else. In the suburbs, it's about the same number of Democrats and Republicans. Something else is still a huge number. There's more people, I think, not in a party than there are in each of the major parties. So what that means is that the registration and the turnout figures mean that when we have, say, county level elections, that the city just doesn't get nearly the proportionate power that it should, which is why we have poor services for low-income residents in the city. They don't turn out and vote, and they don't get considered by the county by and large. That's been true for a long time.
Wow.
Yeah.
What role do you play with the local? Is it a chapter of the Women's
Yeah.
League
It's
of
a
Women Voters?
yeah, it's a chapter. It's called the Rochester Metropolitan Area Chapter. We have around 150 members, I think. We're spread all over the county. So I'm currently on the board of directors, and I'm the chair of the Voter Services Committee. So the Voter Services Committee registers voters, and we do get out the vote activities, and we field an awful lot of questions from voters about, well, this year is really active because the voting procedures are just upended in ways that no one ever anticipated. Yeah, so that's the main thing I worry about is voter registration and voter turnout. And we also get invited. Lots of groups feel that their members should kind of know what's going on, so they'll ask us to come as a speaker and fill them in on whatever their group's interested in, and we do that kind of thing.
So, looking at the issue of voter registration, you pointed to the area that I live in, the area that you live in, and then you made a contrast to other areas where you said registration could be as low as in the 40s of percentile, without trying to be too reductionist and say, well, it's about this or it's about that. What are some of the issues that typically need to be considered to help us understand why voter registration might be so low in particular areas?
Um, yeah, so it's definitely correlated with income. So I think that people who have money are used to feeling like they kind of own things and they have to look after things. Literacy rates are important, um, and how much time you have to spend reading the news. Um, if if you're holding down 3 jobs and taking a bus, it's pretty hard work to feel like you're a qualified voter because you don't have time even to learn about what's going on. And to be fair,
Get to a polling station on election day.
yeah, well, that's true too. Yeah, both of them are true. Um, there's also when I talk to people and I try to convince them to register, because some people are just determinedly not registered. You know, they mostly are just disgusted by our whole political system. They think the whole thing is just corrupt and hopeless and it's never going to help them. So that's a sense which I could easily imagine feeling that way when I look at the conditions that some people are living in. I might have low expectations too.
And to interrupt you for a moment, the
Yeah.
conditions combined with so often what appears to be the inaction in Washington, D.C.
Or Rochester. I mean,
Yes,
uh,
yes, yes.
yeah. Yeah, every way around. Yeah. Um, yeah, I mean, even at a local level, they look at things like there's $1 billion that was spent to rehab all the school buildings in the city school district. And the jobs, people were brought in from outside of Monroe County, and they, there's all these rules that they're supposed to hire a certain percentage of minority workers, and they never can meet those targets. And so there's just a sense that nobody here cares about me. They just don't. And if they're pretending to at election time, they're just liars, and I'm not going to buy into it. Is the kind of attitude that I hear. Um, but I also wanted to say that, in fairness, it's pretty hard work to be a well-informed voter in a lot of ways. I think for president and say for the US House and the US Senate, you can kind of track what's going on, and you can learn enough to be informed. But and the governor probably as well. And beyond that, it starts to get really hard. So if I asked you, for example, well, what assembly district do you live in? And what Senate district do you live in? And what county ledge district do you live in? Most people don't know the answer to that. And that includes most people in these 100% districts I mentioned. I mean, it was true of me until
I include myself.
yeah, yeah. So, so it's hard work, and a lot of people just aren't into it.
What is that about? Is it because local is somehow less sexy than the national, or because national gets much more exposure on the media that the rest of us, or that many of us see?
Well,
What is that? That
so
local
what I
just
mean,
doesn't draw in
yeah,
as
there's
many
several
people.
things going on. One is the collapse of media, right? The newspapers are going defunct. We used to have decent little suburban newspapers, so you could actually read about what was happening in your little town. That I found that interesting and useful. Um, Even the Democrat and Chronicle is collapsing, and the amount of local news it carries is low. But it's also because these districts don't reverberate, right? I'm in, I don't know, the 135th assembly district, maybe. I'm not positive about the number, and I don't know where its boundaries are. So I can read a newspaper article and nothing in it. I could be reading about an important issue, but I wouldn't know how that might reflect on who my representative is or whether they were doing a good job.
Mhm.
It's just not the natural way to write the news. So only like activists who are lobbying on issues become knowledgeable about, who's for what, who's co-sponsoring what bill, how they voted on a particular thing.
So today is Thursday, October 15th. If I'm not mistaken, registration to vote in New York State is now closed. Is that correct?
The registration to vote in November is closed, but there's another election next year. We will be electing the entire county legislature, and the mayor of Rochester will be up, and I
Ah,
think maybe there's a few other offices. I think maybe the sheriff's up. So there's always another election,
there's
so we
always
never
another
stop.
cycle. That
Yeah,
when one ends, another one is.
exactly. Yeah. And
Um,
I have several
so,
friends who are running for things, and they need to get their websites ready for a launch on November 3rd because they're going to be announcing their candidacies next year.
fascinating.
Yeah.
So right now, where organizationally, where is the league's effort being concentrated at this time?
Right now, we're concentrated on getting out the vote. So, specifically on Saturday and Sunday, I have something like 100 volunteers who are going to be walking in some of the low turnout neighborhoods, hanging door hangers on doors that give a lot of information about voting. And there is a lot you need to know to choose your best option. So, you know, absentee voting is bigger than it's ever been. These door hangers that we're going to door hangers that we're going to be hanging, they have information on absentee voting and what the process is. But they also were promoting early voting. A lot of people don't even know that New York has early voting. I think we've only had it since last November. Last a year ago was the first time it was ever used. So we've had two elections with it. So it's not well known. The turnout was low. So that's actually a fantastic opportunity because a lot of people like to vote in person, and they want to know that they filled out their ballot correctly and it's scanned properly and it's going to be
Yes.
vote counted. So you can do that in early voting. There's 9 days when the polls are open. There's a dozen polling sites from the
And that
polling.
begins. October 24th.
Yes,
So early voting at an actual polling station begins on October 24th,
exactly,
and not just day of November 3rd.
exactly,
So
exactly.
if one is registered to vote, go along to the place where? To the place that you would usually vote, or do you need to look
No,
up?
no, they're different. There's 12 sites instead of 300 sites. So it's a smaller number, but you can go to any one you want.
So how do I find out what those 12 sites are if I decide on the 24th that I want to go
You
along?
could look on the League of Women Voters website or the Board of Elections website for the county, or look on our Facebook page.
Great. So I will post links
Yes,
the
that'd be
League of
great.
Women's Voting site that'll give us that information beneath this video on YouTube
Yeah, yeah,
to hopefully make it as easy as possible for people to access that information.
right. So then the next thing we're doing to try to get out the vote is that on that first day of early voting on October 24th, we're going to have motorcades going through 4 different low turnout districts in the city, shouting the news to the heavens that voting is open. You can come out right now. Uh, and they will lead a procession of cars covered with balloons and honking their horns right to the early voting places. And there you will find bands playing, and you will find life-sized cutouts of Frederick Douglass, so you can vote, put your "I voted" sticker on, and take a selfie of yourself with Frederick Douglass, and put it on your social media, and send it to all your family and friends, and say, "Polls are open. It's time to vote." Uh, so that's going to be going on the 24th.
We've been hearing in the news and in media, social media, about concerns about misinformation that people have been receiving beyond just misinformation about voter intimidation. And if people arrive at a polling station, what is not acceptable? What is abnormal that should not be tolerated? And what do
Mhm.
we do with that just as regular citizens who don't want to get into fistfights with anyone, but if
Yeah.
we see things that alarm us, that feel to us that something about what we're seeing is at odds with the democratic process, how do we deal with this?
So a basic rule that everyone should know is that there's no politicking allowed within 100 feet of the polls. So wherever your polling place is, count 100 feet away from the door, and there shouldn't be anyone within that area who is even wearing a hat or a shirt or something that promotes a candidate or a party. And they certainly should not be handing you literature, and they should not be talking to you to try to get you to vote any particular way.
Within
So,
100 feet.
yeah, all of that is a matter of law. Uh, you know, we've never had a big problem with that I was aware of here, and I hope that's going to be true again, but I don't know. I do hear alarming things.
So
Uh,
clearly, then no one is allowed to watch you voting. No one is allowed
right.
to say,
Nobody
show me your ballot so that I can check you've done it properly or that you have just one ballot. Or
Yeah, and the polling workers they're not allowed to touch your ballot, they're not allowed to look at your ballot, so you have to put it in the machine yourself to scan it, and they can stand by and kind of avert their eyes and try to coach you if you're having any problems, but the polling workers really aren't supposed to be doing anything that might let them see how you're voting.
what about if somebody might actually need some assistance? Maybe it's
You
difficult to see the ballot, or they might have difficulty holding a pen or something like that. What happens in that kind of situation?
so two things. One, if it's some kind of disability, we are required by law, and we do have machines that are supposed to be accessible to everyone. So if you're blind, they have certain provisions. If you're deaf, they have other provisions. If you have mobility problems, they have other provisions. They have sip and puff for quadriplegics to be able to mark their own ballots.
And all of these 13 polling stations need to be so equipped.
Not even those 13, but on election day, all 300 or whatever the number is.
Yes,
Every polling place has.
13 leading up to from
Yes.
between October 24th to November 2nd, and
Yes.
then all 300 plus on November 3rd.
Right. Like some people just aren't very sure voters, and they might want someone they trust to help them mark their ballot. That's allowed. You can go in with a companion and have them help you. You can also ask questions to polling workers, and there's certain ones that are designated to help in those certain circumstances, and they sign oaths to be nonpartisan. So you can always ask for help, and it will be provided.
In the unlikely event that we really would hope doesn't occur anywhere, but say, for instance, voters turn up and see something that really makes them feel uncomfortable, that just doesn't feel kosher to them about an election environment, what do we do about that?
There is a phone number that we're handing out, which I can get to you after this.
So we'll include that
Yeah.
information as well. So
Yeah.
it's not that you need to go up to somebody and confront them and say, hey, this isn't okay, but rather call a certain phone number if you see anything that feels questionable.
So, depending on what you see, you could try telling the person in charge of those polling sites. So if it's another voter, or it wouldn't be a bad thing to speak up about poll workers if you see something you don't think is kosher. But if it looks like it's crooked the way the polling place is being run, you probably need to go beyond the workers who are right there. Uh, if it's a matter of somebody else, a member of the public, trying to intimidate you, I would both tell the polling worker and call the emergency number, because that's really not good.
What
And by the
about,
way, the league members are being given training on de-escalation, which I've never had that before. But
and may no one need to use those skills.
yeah,
Good
uh,
to know that someone's got them.
yeah. One of my friends who's worked as a poll worker for quite a few years, has been asked to chair um, her polling site this year, and she's willing to, but she's not looking forward to having to deal with any belligerent members of the public, because she's not the kind of in your face, back down buddy kind of person. But no, I hope that won't happen here.
For anybody who would like to volunteer, what are the opportunities at this point?
So at this point, I could still use a few more volunteers for this weekend. We could use volunteers for the motorcades and the parties on the 24th. And then finally, on election day, we're pretty sure that there will be some polling places that are going to have long lines. And so we're trying to do a support the voters kind of effort. We would like to be able to bring in carts of hot beverages and snacks, and maybe folding chairs, and maybe hand warmers, and maybe people who will hold your place in line if you need to go to the toilet, stuff like that. So um, we have you can volunteer through our website, and we'll put you to work with some of that.
You mentioned at the beginning of our conversation that the league has various issues that it has promoted and fought for publicly. So, three questions that I've got. In some countries, it is the law that one has to vote.
Yeah.
Has that ever been considered by the league, or have they ever come out with a response to that proposal?
I have never seen that one pushed for.
In some countries, it is a public holiday on election day. Has
Yes,
that ever been an issue?
that gets discussed, and I think we're in favor of it. Although lately, uh, early voting and voting by mail have sort of swamped that as other mechanisms to make it easy to vote. So I don't hear as much talk about it.
And the third position in South Africa, I don't know if it's still the case, but it used to be when I was a kid, that on election day, bars were not allowed to open. Have you ever heard of anything like that?
Um, so I can tell you that it's illegal to pay someone to vote. And that is extended to you can't give them a free donut or a free beer or anything. Like a lot of store owners have told me, yeah, I want people to vote, so I wanted to hand out, free whatever it is to anyone with an I voted sticker, and they're not allowed.
Uh-huh. But the handing out of something to keep people warm while they're in line to vote,
Yeah, that's
that doesn't get misconstrued as
no,
trying to buy influence.
that's that's my understanding. No, I don't think so. And
Okay.
we are allowed to reward people for getting people to register to vote.
Uh-huh.
So we've tried a little, it never went very far, but we could have contests like maybe high school students who could register more voters could win some kind of prize. It never caught on, but that is legal, I know.
Good.
Yeah.
Anything else about voting that you would like us to know, whether it's in general, whether it's about the next cycle, which begins on November 4th, or whether it's about this cycle, which ends?
So I guess another thing I should mention, so our league focuses on local voting, but nowadays with cheap telecommunications, you can volunteer anywhere. So there's a lot of good organizations that are doing get out the vote phone calls or texting to various battleground states. And I think that's a really good use of your time. So I'd encourage people to do that. Earlier, they were doing postcards. I think the time for postcards might have passed, but that kind of thing can make quite a difference to
Yeah.
whether people actually vote. Um, and in some places, so phone banking can be hard work because it's kind of intrusive, right? Not everyone wants phone calls from strangers, but in places that have active voter suppression with well targeted lists, people are pretty receptive to being called, and it can feel really satisfying
Hmm.
to reach out to someone who, might think that they might want to vote, but they haven't committed and they aren't very sure, and there's a lot of questions they don't know the answers to. You can really help them get the information they need, and that can be really rewarding.
So I'm assuming there's some kind of volunteer training and possibly even a model script, if I could call it,
Yeah,
or an
yeah, they're
outline.
very well organized.
So you're not thrown into the deep end and it's told you call this number and try to convince them to come out and vote.
Yeah, no, they'll give you sample scripts and have FAQs.
Excellent.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much. I've learned a lot myself. I've been a voter here for 10 years now, actually.
Okay. Yeah.
Still participating in that democratic process.
We have to bring our best selves to the
You know,
table.
I feel like I feel like it's a responsibility and a duty of ours as citizens of democracies to stand up and be present and be counted for.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. Take care. Vote well, vote safely, and we'll be seeing you. Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.